Captain Lauren "Hawk" Donovan leaned back in her seat, eyes scanning the cockpit's array of instruments as Flight 612 hummed with anticipation. The runway lights stretched like a golden river in the twilight, and the hum of the engines beneath her feet thrummed through her bones. Outside the cockpit, the last traces of Dallas-Fort Worth's sunset glinted off the tarmac, and the plane's metallic frame reflected the city lights like a polished mirror. Everything appeared normal, even calm, too calm for someone like Lauren. She adjusted her headset, hearing the familiar chatter of her co-pilot, First Officer James Whitman, a man whose steady demeanor often balanced her sharper instincts. "Clear for takeoff," the tower's voice crackled, calm but precise. Lauren responded with a clipped acknowledgement, hands gripping the yoke as she guided the massive airliner forward. The passengers, blissfully unaware of what was to come, were settling in. Families clutched each other's hands, business travelers tapped away at laptops, and children pressed noses against the small windows, marveling at the bustling tarmac. The cabin smelled faintly of recycled air, coffee, and pretzels, a comforting aroma that belied the chaos that would soon erupt. Lauren stole a quick glance at the crew, nodding their smiles and professionalism. Flight attendants were moving briskly, ensuring seatbelts were fastened, tray tables up, and all were prepared for the usual routine of takeoff. Lauren's military mind, however, couldn't shake the feeling of tension coiled in her chest. Her eyes flicked to the digital weather report flashing on the dashboard, pockets of severe turbulence predicted along their route over the Rockies. Pilots often dismissed such warnings, but she knew better. Storms in those mountains could twist the plane like a toy if underestimated. She tapped her fingers lightly on the yoke, her thoughts drifting back to her days as a fighter pilot, high-altitude maneuvers, split-second decisions, the hum of engines at full throttle. That training had saved her life more times than she cared to count, and today it whispered a caution she couldn't ignore. The takeoff roll began, a steady vibration coursing through her body. The plane surged forward, gaining speed with each heartbeat. Lauren's eyes were fixed ahead, scanning the runway, checking the instruments, mentally running through every emergency protocol she could imagine. Around her, James monitored the systems, his hands steady but his jaw tight. They had flown together for years, but even he seemed to sense that something was off tonight. 30 knots, Lauren murmured, voice low, almost to herself. The cabin lurched forward as the engines roared, the vibration turning into a tangible force that pressed everyone into their seats. 80 knots, 100 knots V1. She made the call almost instinctively, the moment of no return, and pressed forward on the throttles. The plane lifted gently, tires leaving the runway, and the city lights blurred beneath them as Flight 612 climbed into the evening sky. Inside, the cabin was alive with ordinary sounds. The click of seatbelt buckles, the hum of conversation, a baby's cry piercing briefly before a mother soothed it with gentle murmurs. Flight attendants moved gracefully, offering smiles and reassurance, while passengers gazed out at the shrinking city below. It was a moment of fragile normalcy, the kind that passengers took for granted. Lauren's eyes lingered on the horizon, a thin band of orange fading into the darkening sky, and she allowed herself a brief sense of calm. And then it began. The first tremor was subtle, a vibration through the yoke that could have been dismissed as routine. But the second shudder was more violent, making Lauren's stomach lurch. James muttered, "That's not turbulence." The instruments flickered, warning lights blinking in harsh red against the soft glow of the dashboard. Hydraulics, electrical. Lauren didn't have time to think. The plane shuddered again, violently enough to send a drink spilling from a cup in the first-class cabin, sending passengers jolting upright. Screams erupted. Lauren's hands tightened on the yoke, knuckles white. "Brace yourselves," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. Flight attendants grasped overhead bins and cabin rails, steadying themselves as passengers clutched each other, some screaming, others whispering prayers. The overhead lights flickered, plunging the cabin into a surreal strobe effect, then stabilizing, but the tension lingered like a storm cloud. Lauren's military instincts kicked in. She scanned every instrument, every gauge, every blinking light. Something wasn't right. This wasn't ordinary turbulence. Systems were flickering, some warning indicators glowing with a harsh intensity she hadn't seen since simulator drills in the Air Force. She glanced at James. Check the auxiliary power, hydraulics. His fingers danced over the controls, eyes wide. "We're losing everything," he said, voice tight. The cockpit was suddenly filled with a mechanical cacophony. Alarms screaming, warning lights flashing, and the steady hum of engines struggling under load. Lauren's mind raced, flipping through emergency procedures as the plane lurched again, violently this time like a wild animal. The passengers screamed, some banging on tray tables, others frozen in terror. Flight attendants tried to calm them, but even their composed smiles couldn't mask the fear in the cabin. Lauren felt her pulse hammering in her ears, adrenaline surging. She recalled training exercises from her military days, moments when the odds were impossible, yet survival depended on instinct and split-second decisions. Every muscle, every neuron, every ounce of experience was now engaged in a desperate battle to keep this massive machine airborne. And then, just as abruptly as it began, the plane stabilized, a fragile, shaky calm. Lauren let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. James wiped sweat from his brow, and for a fleeting second, it seemed as if the worst had passed. But Lauren didn't relax, not truly. Her eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the instruments again. Something had triggered the chaos, something beyond ordinary weather. Outside, clouds swirled unnaturally, illuminated by lightning that danced like a predator in the darkness. A deep, instinctual unease settled in her stomach. She had faced danger before, firefights, hostile skis, impossible maneuvers. But nothing in her commercial career had prepared her for the feeling that this storm, this flight, was only the beginning. She glanced at the passengers through the small cockpit window. Families clutched each other tightly, some whispering frantic prayers, others staring wide-eyed at the ceiling as if seeking answers from the air itself. One elderly man in seat 12B gripped his wife's hand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. A young boy stared out the window, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Lauren's throat tightened. Every life in that cabin was now in her hands, 185 people, counting every soul. "James," she said quietly, voice barely audible over the hum of the failing systems, "we need to be ready for anything. Stay sharp." The co-pilot nodded, swallowing hard, his usually steady demeanor now laced with tension. Lauren's mind raced through contingencies, hydraulic failure, engine shutdown, emergency descent, running scenarios faster than any computer could. She had been a fighter pilot, trained to act under impossible pressure, but this was different. This wasn't a mission she could plan for. This was real lives, not simulations, and every decision mattered. The seatbelt signs flashed ominously. Lauren's gaze flicked to the storm outside again. Lightning illuminated the clouds in jagged streaks, revealing turbulent patterns that seemed almost alive. The wind buffeted the fuselage, making the plane shudder as if testing her resolve. Lauren's heart pounded in sync with the plane's tremors. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Survival required focus, precision, calm. And then a sudden, inexplicable silence filled the cockpit, not peaceful but tense. The alarms had momentarily ceased, the instruments stable. Lauren didn't trust it. She glanced at James, whose eyes mirrored her own unease. Something was coming. Something beyond routine turbulence, beyond system failures. She didn't know what it was yet, but she felt it, the prickling sensation of danger crawling up her spine, the kind that had once saved her in combat zones, and now warned her that Flight 612 was about to enter the most perilous moments of its journey. Lauren's hands tightened on the yoke, her jaw set. The 185 passengers behind her, oblivious to the true danger, had entrusted their lives to her, and she would not fail them. Not now, not ever. Suspense hook. Something wasn't just wrong with the weather. Something was coming, and Lauren Donovan was about to face it head-on. Lauren's hands were locked on the yoke, knuckles pale against the worn leather grips. The The fleeting calm had passed. Alarms erupted again, shrill and unrelenting, flashing across the cockpit panels like a warning etched in fire. The auxiliary power system was failing, and with it, most of the plane's critical controls. James's eyes darted from screen to screen, his fingers dancing over switches in a frantic ballet. Hydraulics are fluctuating. Flight controls are sluggish, he said, voice tight with the first real hint of panic. Lauren swallowed hard. Every muscle in her body tensed as she scanned the instruments. "Manual override ready?" she asked, her voice measured steady. Even with decades of combat training and experience, nothing could fully prepare her for a situation like this. A commercial jet in total peril at 32,000 feet, with 185 souls depending on her instinct and skill. In the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from polite chatter to tense fear. Bobbies wailed, children clutched their parents' hands, and murmurs of prayer and panic rose in a cacophony that reverberated through the fuselage. Flight attendants struggled to keep control, bracing themselves against the bucking plane while trying to calm the screaming passengers. "Stay calm, everyone, stay calm," one shouted, her voice trembling just slightly as the plane tilted violently to the left. Lauren's mind raced through every possible emergency scenario. Engine failure, partial hydraulic loss, electrical surge. Each new flicker of red light on the instrument panel brought a fresh wave of adrenaline. Her military instincts, honed over years of combat missions, kicked into overdrive. She remembered the simulations, the drills where she had lost power and had to rely on muscle memory alone. Now, that training was the difference between life and death. Suddenly, the plane shuddered violently, as if the air itself had turned against them. Passengers screamed, some gripping each other with white-knuckled desperation. James gritted his teeth, his eyes wide. "We're losing altitude faster than expected," he said, his voice a tight whisper over the roar of the failing engines. "I can't get the stabilizers to respond." Lauren's jaw tightened. Her mind raced, flipping through every possible maneuver. Emergency descent, controlled glide, manual override of the remaining hydraulics. She issued orders to herself almost as much as to James, her voice slicing through the chaos like a lifeline. "Engage what's left of the manual control. Ignore autopilot. Focus on lift, hold steady." The cockpit trembled again. The fuselage groaned like a living thing, metal protesting the unnatural strain. Lauren felt the plane respond sluggishly, only partially to her commands. She adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke, and held her breath as the massive jet groaned through the violent turbulence. Every second felt like an eternity. She could hear the muted cries of terror from the cabin, the scraping of luggage against overhead bins, and the distant, frantic commands of the flight attendants trying to maintain order. Then came the radio silence. Lauren reached for the communication panel, flipping switches, pushing buttons. Static, dead air. She tried again, then again. "Tower, any control, mayday." Her voice cracked slightly over the speakers, each failed attempt gnawing at her confidence. There was no response. The routine protocols of flight control, the invisible network of reassurance and guidance, had vanished. A chill ran down her spine. Total radio silence meant they were isolated. No tower, no air traffic control, no immediate assistance. Just them, the failing plane, the storm, and 185 terrified passengers. Lauren's stomach tightened. She had faced danger before, but never like this. Never where the margin for error was measured not in seconds, but in hearts beating in fear behind her. Outside the cockpit window, lightning split the clouds in jagged brilliance, illuminating a world of swirling darkness and chaos. The plane dipped and jolted, each movement exaggerated by the turbulent air. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged and indifferent, their peaks lost in the storm's angry embrace. Lauren's heart pounded, every sense alert. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and Flight 612 would become a catastrophe. James swallowed hard. "Lauren, I don't know if we can stabilize it," he muttered, fear in his voice. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. She drew in a deep, steadying breath, calling on every ounce of skill, every fragment of her training. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "We have control. We're not giving up. Not now, not ever. Focus on lift. Manual override, now." The plane responded ever so slightly. A tiny correction, a minuscule adjustment, but it was enough. It was a lifeline. Lauren's mind raced, calculating each maneuver in real time, a rapid mental algorithm of physics and human limits. She could feel the plane fighting against her commands, but also responding, a fragile partnership between pilot and machine, tenuous yet powerful. Inside the cabin, the passengers clung to hope without realizing it. A mother whispered soothing words to her crying child, her voice trembling but determined. An elderly man gripped his wife's hand, his knuckles white but firm. Lauren felt their fear, their vulnerability, and it sharpened her focus. These were not statistics. These were lives, human lives, trusting her to guide them through the storm, and she would not fail them. Then came the first unmistakable sign that they were not alone. Outside, through the storm-smeared windows, two streaks of light appeared, slicing through the darkness with unnatural precision. At first, Lauren thought it might be lightning reflected, but no, the streaks moved with intent, coordinating their approach to the struggling plane. She squinted, heart pounding. Fighter jets, at this altitude, at this moment. The presence of the jets was a puzzle, elite F-22 Raptors, moving with silent precision, flanking Flight 612 as if they had anticipated the emergency before it happened. Lauren's mind raced. Were these military escorts? Could they be aware of her? She couldn't imagine any civilian flight plan that would call for fighter jets at this altitude, let alone during an emergency. Yet there they were, cutting through the storm, perfectly synchronized. A voice finally crackled through the radio, distant, distorted, but unmistakable. "Flight 612, do you read us?" Lauren's pulse quickened. She flipped switches, adjusted frequencies, and answered. "Flight 612 here. We read you. Systems failing, hydraulics unstable." Static, then another voice, calm, precise, almost eerily familiar. "Flight 612, maintain calm. We're on approach." Lauren's brow furrowed. The voice had authority, military authority. It wasn't the tower. It wasn't ATC. Whoever it was, they knew about her, about the failing plane, and they were coming closer. A shiver ran down her spine. This was no ordinary rescue. James leaned closer. "Lauren, who are they?" Lauren didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked the jets outside, their sleek forms slicing through the storm like guardians of the sky. Her instincts screamed at her, these pilots knew her. And that realization, sudden and sharp, sent adrenaline spiking through her veins. The storm around them raged with renewed intensity, tossing Flight 612 like a leaf in a hurricane. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the wing flaps struggling against the wind, the engines fighting to maintain thrust. Inside the cockpit, Lauren and James worked in silent coordination, muscles tense, minds focused. Outside, the jets mirrored their movements, flanking and guiding them, yet remaining distant enough to avoid interference. Lauren gritted her teeth. Every instinct told her that this was just the beginning, the calm, the brief moments of stability, the strange presence of these F-22s, all of it was leading to something far greater. And as the plane lurched violently, alarms shrieking once more, Lauren's heart hammered in her chest. She had kept Flight 612 steady through the first wave of chaos, but the worst was still coming. Suspense hook. Their radio was dead, systems were failing, and the F-22s weren't just observers. They were waiting for her next move. Lauren Donovan's eyes never left the storm. The plane trembled beneath her hands as if testing her resolve. Every warning light screamed at her. Every shudder of the fuselage reminded her that Flight 612 was no longer under normal control. James's fingers flew over the cockpit switches, but the systems barely responded. Hydraulic failure. Partial electrical loss. Engine strain. Every second was a fight, and every passenger behind them clung to an invisible lifeline, Lauren's skill. Through the chaos, Lauren glimpsed the F-22s again. They weren't random. They moved with intention, flanking the airliner on either side, a perfect mirror of the plane's trajectory. One streak of silver cut to the left, one to the right, their engines roaring through the storm yet somehow remaining perfectly in sync with the struggling jet. They were guardians, but also something more. "Lauren, look at that," James said, voice tight, pointing to the radar display. On the screen, two blips mirrored their path, each precisely aligned with Flight 612's vector. How did they know? Lauren's chest tightened. Recognition flared within her like a spark she hadn't felt in years. The formation, the precision, the perfect timing, these were no ordinary fighter pilots. These were professionals trained to anticipate danger, to respond before chaos even arrived. And somehow, they had been sent to her. The storm intensified, shaking the plane violently. Passengers screamed. Bobbies wailed, and even the calmest adults clutched each other with white-knuckled desperation. Flight attendants braced themselves against the buckling aisle, struggling to maintain order. Lauren felt every vibration of the fuselage like a warning drumbeat in her chest. Then came the voice, calm, precise, and unmistakable. "Flight 612, maintain heading. Do not attempt altitude adjustments until we guide you." Lauren's heart skipped. Military tone, no hesitation, no questioning. And the call sign, she froze. Someone had just called her by her old call sign, Hawk. Her past life, the one she had left behind when joining commercial aviation, had just come roaring back into the present. "Hawk, did you hear that?" James asked, disbelief in his voice. Lauren swallowed, knuckles white against the yoke. "Yes," she whispered, "they know me. And they're not here for the plane, they're here for me." A flash of lightning illuminated the storm outside, revealing the sleek forms of the F-22s cutting through sheets of rain and turbulence. Their pilots remained faceless behind dark visors, yet their presence radiated authority, control, and something deeply familiar. Lauren's stomach twisted. How could they know her call sign? How could they possibly anticipate the exact moment she would need guidance? She fought to focus on the plane. Every second in this storm was a calculated risk. The hydraulics had failed on both wings, leaving minimal control over lift and flaps. The engines sputtered, struggling against the turbulent air. Lauren's mind raced through every possible maneuver, drawing on her memory of high-intensity combat drills and emergency simulations. She could feel the plane responding slightly to her adjustments, but the margin for error was razor-thin. James's voice cut through her concentration. "Lauren, the passengers." His gaze shifted to the cabin, visible on the small monitor that showed live footage from within the plane. People were panicking, some praying aloud, some screaming. The flight attendants did their best to keep them restrained and calm, but the storm's violence and the failing systems amplified every ounce of fear. Lauren exhaled slowly, forcing her mind back to control. Fear could be fatal. Focus was survival. She remembered what her instructors in the Air Force had drilled into her years ago. Control what you can, adapt to what you can't, and never ever give up. She repeated it silently, letting each word steel her resolve. The F-22s moved closer, their precision almost unnatural. Lauren noticed subtle adjustments in their formation, subtle cues she instinctively understood from years of combat coordination. They were signaling something: guidance, not commands, but a synchronized choreography that allowed her a fraction of stability in the chaos. Her mind flicked back to a memory buried deep. Classified operations in hostile skis, dangerous maneuvers where one misstep could cost lives. The faces of her squadron flashed in her mind. Some lost, some missing, some thought long gone. And now somehow remnants of that world had returned, not as ghosts, but as guardians in the present moment. Lauren adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke, and focused on microcorrections, each one a gamble with the storm. The plane groaned under stress, but it responded ever so slightly like a wounded animal guided by a steady hand. The F-22s mirrored her path, their presence a silent reassurance and a warning. One wrong move and the symmetry would break, leaving the jet vulnerable. Then the unexpected. The voice came again, closer now, urgent yet calm. "Hawk, you're in control. Trust your instincts. We've got you." Lauren's breath caught. They knew her. They were watching her. They trusted her. In that instant, fear and recognition collided, a cocktail of adrenaline and relief. The passengers, unaware of the elite pilots flanking them through the storm, remained in terror. Lauren's focus sharpened. Every decision now carried the weight of not just her past, but 185 lives. The plane lurched again violently as a bolt of lightning struck somewhere nearby. The cabin shook, throwing passengers and crew against their restraints. Screams filled the air. Lauren gritted her teeth and tightened her grip, issuing commands to James as she stabilized the yoke. "Adjust left a degree. Increase throttle 3%. Hold heading." Outside, the F-22s responded in perfect sync, one shifting slightly to counterbalance the jet, the other cutting through the gusts to block the worst of the wind shear. Lauren felt a strange mixture of awe and terror. They weren't just pilots. They were extensions of the sky itself, moving in harmony with the struggling airliner, anticipating turbulence, counteracting forces that should have been uncontrollable. Lauren exhaled slowly, but the unease lingered. Something was coming, she could feel it, the premonition of danger that no instrument or radar could measure. The storm was the first threat, yes, but the presence of these F-22s, their cryptic communication, their intimate knowledge of her past, it hinted at a deeper, unseen force. Someone had orchestrated this, and somehow it involved her. She glanced at James. "Prepare for anything. Don't assume the worst is behind us. This is only the beginning." James nodded, his jaw tight. "Agreed. But I've never seen anything like this, fighters responding like they know us personally. How is that even possible?" Lauren didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer would reveal itself soon enough, and she had to survive until it did. Every correction, every micro-movement of the yoke, every ounce of focus was now a battle between life and death. Lightning struck again, illuminating the clouds like a cathedral of chaos, and for a brief moment, Lauren saw the impossible clarity. The F-22 pilots were signaling her, flanking her, guiding her through a storm no ordinary plane could survive. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She was not alone, but she was still the one holding 185 lives in her hands. The voice came again, this time closer, direct. "Hawk, trust yourself, trust your training. We'll guide you through this, but the next move is yours." Lauren swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her like the storm itself. The plane shuddered again. The systems were failing. The passengers were terrified. And above them, the F-22s waited, precise and patient. Suspense hook. The F-22s weren't just responding to the emergency. They were waiting for her next move. And whatever was coming next, Lauren knew, would push her skills, courage, and pass to the absolute limit. Lauren's knuckles were white against the yoke. The cabin behind her was a symphony of fear and panic, passengers screaming, flight attendants shouting instructions over the roar of the failing engines, luggage rattling in overhead bins like small meteors. Every jolt of the fuselage vibrated up her arms and through her core. The storm had intensified, battering Flight 612 with a violence that seemed almost sentient. "Engines are sputtering," James said, voice tight, eyes flicking between monitors. "We've lost hydraulic response on the left wing. Flaps are sluggish. The autopilot is offline." Lauren's heart hammered. There was no time for panic. She drew a deep, steadying breath, recalling her years as a fighter pilot, moments where life or death depended on instinct and split-second decision-making. Every fiber of her being screamed, "You are the last line of defense." "Manual override now," she said firmly. James's fingers moved with precise urgency over the remaining controls. Together, they fought against the failing systems, nudging the plane incrementally, micro-adjustments in a battle against gravity, wind shear, and storm turbulence. Every second was a delicate negotiation with physics itself. The plane lurched violently to the left, throwing a pair of passengers into each other as they screamed. Flight attendants braced themselves, gripping rails and handles. Lauren's stomach sank as she visualized the cabin. Every soul was depending on her. One mistake, one hesitation, she swallowed the fear, her jaw set. Not now, not ever. Lightning illuminated the storm outside, briefly revealing the jagged mountain peaks below. The Rocky Mountains stretched like a dark spine, clouds roiling above them, and turbulence buffeting the plane in unpredictable gusts. Lauren had flown through turbulence before, yes, but never like this. This storm was a predator, and Flight 612 was its prey. "Hold heading," she barked, over the alarms and the roar of the storm. The plane groaned, metal straining, engine sputtering. Every muscle in Lauren's body tensed as she adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke, and fought to keep the plane level. Outside, the F-22s mirrored her maneuvers, their precision breathtaking. One streaked to her left, countering the wind shear, while the other to her right appeared to act as a protective buffer against the storm's worst gusts. Their movement was synchronized, almost telepathic, guiding her subtly without interfering. Lauren could feel the invisible hand of experience, her own training amplified through their guidance. Then came the first critical moment. A violent downdraft slammed into the plane, shaking it hard enough to throw loose objects across the cabin. The flaps refused to respond fully. The engines coughed violently. Passengers screamed, some crying, some gripping the armrests so tightly their knuckles turned white. Lauren's stomach lurched as she fought to maintain altitude, her hands dancing over the manual controls, heart hammering in her chest. "Brace for impact," she shouted, not knowing if it was a false alarm or the truth. Flight attendants shouted instructions, holding passengers in place as the plane dipped sharply. Lauren pushed, pulled, twisted the yoke, and relied entirely on muscle memory and instinct. The plane responded, just enough to keep them from plummeting into the mountains below. James's voice broke through the storm, a lifeline amid the chaos. "Lauren, the F-22s, they're reading your inputs. They're adjusting in real time. It's like they're extensions of the plane itself." Lauren swallowed hard, awareness sharpening to razor focus. Every movement was a calculation, every adjustment a delicate negotiation with physics, wind, and failing machinery. She felt the weight of every passenger's life pressing down on her shoulders, mingled with the adrenaline-fueled clarity that comes only in moments of absolute crisis. Then the storm threw them another curveball. One engine flared, sputtered, and went silent. Alarms screamed. Cabin lights flickered violently. Panic erupted. Passengers screamed louder, some banging on seatbacks in terror. Flight attendants braced themselves, shouting above the chaos. Lauren felt the plane's sluggish response beneath her fingers. Gravity was insistent. She gritted her teeth and forced herself into calm calculation. One engine out didn't mean they were doomed. She had survived far worse in her combat days. But now, the margin for error was razor-thin. Every micro-adjustment mattered. Every heartbeat counted. The F-22s responded. One streak shifted slightly, breaking through a gust of wind and creating a buffer of stabilized air. The other mirrored Lauren's maneuvers, providing subtle cues she instinctively understood. It was extraordinary, almost impossible, elite fighter pilots, in perfect sync with a commercial jet, through a storm that could have torn it apart. And then came the voice, calm and precise. "Hawk, you're in control, trust your instincts. You've done this before, we're here." Lauren's breath caught. Her old call sign, Hawk, spoken over the storm, over the failing systems, over the chaos. Recognition, connection, relief and tension collided in a surge of adrenaline. She swallowed, nodding subtly to James. "Engage microcorrections," she instructed, voice sharp. "Follow the storm, don't fight it. Keep the plane's center of gravity stable. Seconds felt like minutes as she executed the maneuvers. The plane responded just enough to hold altitude, avoiding the worst of the downdrafts and gusts. The F-22s maintained their precise formation, guiding her, providing silent reassurance. A flash of lightning revealed the mountain peaks again, jagged, merciless, and terrifyingly close. Lauren adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke, and held her breath. The plane lurched violently, but it didn't tip, didn't fall. The passengers screamed, clutched each other, and prayed. Lauren's focus narrowed to the instruments, the yoke, and the storm outside. Minutes felt like hours. Sweat dripped down her temples, soaking her hair. Her muscles ached, her fingers burned from gripping the yoke. Every nerve was on edge, every sense heightened. Yet through it all she held. She kept control. James leaned closer. "Lauren, you're doing it. We're staying level. The F-22s, I can't believe it, but they're literally holding us steady in the storm. They're reading every input." Lauren exhaled, her mind razor-sharp. One thought repeated in her head: focus, survive, protect every life. She wasn't a civilian pilot anymore. She was Hawk, the combat pilot, the trained warrior of the skis, and she would not fail. The storm, relentless, continued to batter them. Lightning tore through the clouds, illuminating the plane's wings flexing under the stress. Rain hammered against the fuselage. The cabin trembled violently. And yet, with each coordinated maneuver, Lauren and the F-22s carved a path through chaos, microsecond by microsecond, inch by inch. And then it hit her. This was not just a storm. It wasn't random turbulence. The precision, the timing, the sheer orchestration of the challenges, someone, somewhere had orchestrated this, and somehow it was tied to her, to Hawk. Lauren's pulse quickened. She knew she had survived impossible situations before. But this was different. This was a test of skill, courage, and instinct against a storm that seemed to have a mind of its own, guided by forces she could not yet understand. Suspense hook. Could she keep 185 lives from becoming statistics? Or was the storm just the first part of a far larger, more dangerous test? Lauren Donovan gritted her teeth as Flight 612 pitched and shuddered through the violent storm. Her hands burned on the yoke, muscles taut from hours of micro-adjustments, each one a delicate battle against gravity, failing hydraulics, and wind shear that could snap the plane like a twig. The F-22s flanking them moved with astonishing precision, anticipating her moves before she even made them. But it wasn't just their skill that froze her heart. It was recognition. "Hawk, do you read me?" The voice was calm, clipped, military, and it carried the weight of history. Lauren froze. The word Hawk, her call sign from a past she had buried deep beneath her civilian identity, had just been spoken over the storm. Recognition. Intimacy. Someone remembered her. Someone knew her. James leaned closer, squinting at the radar. "Lauren, did they just call you by your call sign?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and awe. Lauren nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes," she said quietly. The word felt foreign in the context of this flight, yet it carried a surge of adrenaline that sharpened her instincts. "And I think they know me, not just as a pilot, but me." Her mind flashed back to classified operations she had thought were lost to memory. Missions where her decisions had been life or death, where every move had been calculated under extreme pressure, where trust and coordination had been literal survival. Friends, squadmates, comrades, faces she had thought lost to time, had once relied on her, just as 185 strangers now relied on her in the cabin behind her. The plane lurched violently, throwing James sideways against his seat. Lauren countered instinctively, nudging the yoke, adjusting throttles, holding the plane steady. Every movement was a test of muscle memory and instinct. The storm roared like an angry beast outside, lightning flashing through the clouds in jagged bursts, illuminating the F-22s as they mirrored her movements flawlessly. Then another message, clearer this time. "Hawk, maintain focus. We're here for you, follow our guidance, do not deviate. Lauren's pulse surged. They knew me. They trusted me. And they were here. But why? How could pilots in these jets, whose presence was classified, whose missions were off the radar of every civilian authority, be tracking her so precisely? Questions collided in her mind even as the storm demanded immediate attention. She glanced at James. They're not here for the plane. They're here for me, she muttered almost to herself. Her voice was steady, but inside a swirl of fear, awe, and disbelief churned. The cabin jolted violently, passengers screaming and clutching each other, flight attendants bracing against the shaking aisle. Lauren inhaled, exhaling slowly. Fear could be deadly. Panic was worse. She had to remain the anchor. 185 lives hung on her every decision. Microadjust right 3 degrees, she ordered, fingers dancing over the manual controls. The plane responded, sluggish but obedient. The F-22s adjusted in tandem, one slightly ahead, one behind, creating a buffer against the worst of the wind shear. Lauren felt an almost supernatural synchronicity, as if the jets themselves were extensions of her hands and instincts, moving in perfect harmony with her, guiding, protecting, yet never taking control. Lightning illuminated the cockpit briefly. Lauren saw the reflection of the storm on the instruments, the shadows of the flailing wings, the tension etched on James's face. She swallowed hard. The storm was relentless, but the connection, the recognition from above, gave her something she hadn't felt in years: clarity. Her mind raced back to Operation Nightfall, a classified combat mission she had commanded years ago. The one where her squadron had been ambushed, cut off from support, left to survive in impossible conditions. She had relied on split-second decisions, intuition, and unspoken coordination with her team to bring everyone home. And now, decades later, those same instincts were saving 185 strangers. "Hawk, do not hesitate," the voice said again. "We know your capability, trust yourself." Lauren's chest tightened. Trust herself. She had trained for this, in simulations, in combat, in moments where hesitation could cost lives. But never for this scale, never for civilians who had no idea what was happening just feet behind her. She let the adrenaline sharpen her focus. Fear existed only as a tool, a reminder that lives were at stake. The plane lurched violently again, jolting passengers in terror. Flight attendants braced themselves, whispering frantic prayers, gripping seat rails. Lauren countered, nudging the throttles, micro-adjusting the yoke, keeping Flight 612 as steady as possible. The engines groaned, one coughing, but it held. Just barely. Lightning revealed the jagged peaks of the Rockies, twisted and violent in the storm. The plane was dangerously close, but Lauren's training, instincts, and the guidance from the F-22s gave her a fragile edge. Every maneuver was precise, every correction calculated, every heartbeat mattered. And then came a flash of recognition. One of the F-22s shifted its formation slightly, a subtle signal she instinctively understood, a coded move from her past. These weren't random pilots. They were her squad, or remnants of it, operating from a realm of secrecy she had thought was lost to history. Faces she had once trusted with her life, now guiding her through a storm that could kill 185 people. Lauren swallowed, awe and fear warring in her chest. The storm outside was a deadly enemy, but these pilots, her past reaching into the present, were a lifeline. The thought was humbling, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. "Prepare for descent," the voice said. "We're guiding you to a safe corridor. Follow precisely. One mistake and it will be fatal." Lauren nodded, exhaling slowly. Her hands gripped the yoke tighter, muscles straining. She issued micro-adjustments, nudging the plane left, right, up, down, all while anticipating turbulence and compensating for failing hydraulics. James mirrored her actions, providing support, but the primary burden was hers. The passengers screamed and prayed, unaware of the invisible web of precision and trust that was guiding them. Lauren felt their fear as if it were her own, and she realized that for the first time in decades, her past, the call sign, the missions, The comrades had returned not as ghosts, but as allies, silent and precise, flanking her in the storm. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the F-22s, the wings flexing under stress, the pilot's movements coordinated with uncanny perfection. Lauren exhaled, pushing herself further, each micro-adjustment a dance of survival. She felt it, a strange, almost spiritual connection with the pilots above, an unspoken understanding. We've got you. We've always trusted you. Trust yourself now. Suspense hook. Her hidden past was coming back in real time, and the storm, the failing systems, and the 185 lives depended entirely on her next move. The roar of the storm filled the cockpit, punctuated by the shrill alarms of Flight 612's failing systems. Lauren Donovan's muscles burned from the relentless adjustments she'd been making for what felt like hours. Every jolt of the plane vibrated through her, each shudder a reminder of the fragile balance between control and catastrophe. The passengers behind her were screaming, some clutching loved ones, some frozen in wide-eyed terror, and every ounce of Lauren's focus was on keeping them alive. The F-22s, still flanking the airliner, moved with synchronized precision. One adjusted slightly ahead of the plane, slicing through the violent gusts to create a buffer. The other mirrored her micro-adjustments on the opposite side. Their presence was reassuring, almost ethereal, yet the knowledge that these pilots were tracking her every move added a layer of pressure she had never experienced. These were elite pilots, professionals trained to anticipate danger and act before chaos arrived, and somehow they had been sent to her. "Hawk, prepare for descent. Follow the corridor precisely," the calm, military voice instructed. The words sent a chill down Lauren's spine. They knew her call sign. They trusted her. But the storm, the failing hydraulics, the passengers, all of it meant that one wrong move could turn this descent into a disaster. James swallowed hard. "Lauren, are you ready for this?" he asked, eyes wide with both fear and admiration. Lauren didn't answer immediately. She inhaled, centering herself, letting the surge of adrenaline sharpen her focus. "We don't have a choice," she said finally. "Ready or not, we go down now. Hold tight." The descent began, a careful, calculated negotiation with gravity, wind shear, and failing systems. The plane shuddered violently as it cut through the storm clouds, lightning illuminating the rocky peaks of the Rockies that rose like jagged teeth below them. Every adjustment of the yoke, every nudge of the throttles was critical. The plane responded sluggishly, testing her skills, testing her patience, testing her very instinct for survival. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed and clutched each other. Flight attendants braced themselves, shouting above the roar of the engines and the wail of the storm. Lauren felt their fear as if it were her own. Every life in that cabin, 185 souls, was her responsibility. Every heartbeat, every movement, every breath depended on her ability to remain calm, precise, and unflinching. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, illuminating the wings flexing violently under the stress of wind shear. The plane groaned, metal protesting the pressure. The left engine sputtered, coughing violently, and alarms shrieked anew. Lauren's heart pounded in her chest. "Throttle up 5%. Stabilize the left wing," she shouted. James mirrored her actions, fighting to maintain balance as the plane wobbled dangerously. The F-22s responded instantaneously, their positions shifting with imperceptible precision to guide her through the worst of the turbulence. One streak of silver cut slightly ahead, breaking the brunt of a powerful gust, while the other mirrored her micro-adjustments on the opposite side, counteracting the violent wind shear. Lauren could feel the invisible hands of her squadmates, pilots she had trained with in classified operations years ago, guiding her, supporting her, giving her the edge she needed to survive. And yet the storm was relentless. Another violent downdraft slammed into the plane, pitching it sharply downward. Passengers screamed, gripping each other in terror. Flight attendants braced themselves, shouting instructions over the cacophony. Lauren gritted her teeth, making split-second adjustments to the yoke and throttles. The plane groaned but did not tip, did not fall. They had survived one wave, but there were more to come. Hawk, maintain heading. Microadjust every 2 seconds. Do not overcorrect, the voice commanded. Lauren's chest tightened. Every word carried authority and trust, a reminder that these pilots were watching, guiding, yet relying entirely on her skills. She nodded subtly to James, who mirrored her movements, and together they navigated the jet with precision that seemed almost impossible. Lightning illuminated the mountains again, revealing jagged peaks far closer than she had imagined. The terrain was unforgiving. One miscalculation could send them crashing into the rocky spires below. Sweat dripped down Lauren's temple, soaking her hair. Her hands were raw from the constant adjustments, yet she didn't falter. Fear existed only as fuel for focus. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. The left engine flared, then stabilized for a brief moment. Lauren adjusted the throttles, carefully balancing the remaining thrust with the failing hydraulics. The plane responded inch by inch, degree by degree, holding a fragile equilibrium. She felt the passengers' fear like a physical weight pressing down on her, and it sharpened her focus even more. Every movement, every decision, every breath mattered. Then came the voice again, calm and precise. Hawk, the corridor is clear ahead. Follow our guidance precisely. One mistake and the terrain will take the plane. Lauren's stomach tightened. The corridor, a narrow path carved between jagged peaks and violent wind currents, was their only chance. She nodded, exhaling slowly, letting adrenaline sharpen her senses. The plane lurched again violently, but she countered instantly, nudging the yoke, adjusting throttles, holding altitude. The F-22s mirrored her moves perfectly, creating a protective buffer against the storm. Lightning struck closer, illuminating the jagged peaks, and for a moment Lauren felt the full magnitude of what was at stake. The mountains loomed like a jagged wall, unforgiving and relentless. Behind her, 185 lives clung to hope and terror alike, and above, the F-22s waited, silent sentinels guiding her through the chaos. Hawk, maintain heading. Trust your instincts, trust us, the voice instructed again. Lauren exhaled slowly, centering herself. She was Hawk, the combat pilot, the fighter trained to survive impossible situations. She had led missions where every second was life or death. And now, that same instinct, that same split-second calculation and trust in herself, was keeping Flight 612 in the air. The plane shuddered violently, another gust threatening to throw them off course. Lauren micro-adjusted, nudging the yoke, countering the turbulence. The engines groaned, alarms shrieked, and the fuselage trembled under the storm's wrath. And yet, inch by inch, they advanced. The corridor was narrowing, but the plane held. James leaned closer, whispering, "Lauren, you're doing it. We're holding steady." Lauren's jaw set. "We're not done yet. One misstep and it's over." She exhaled, focusing entirely on the instruments, the yoke, the throttles, the turbulent air outside, and the invisible guidance from the F-22s. Every second was a negotiation with fate, a battle between skill, instinct, and sheer willpower. Lightning illuminated the cockpit again, and in that brief flash, Lauren glimpsed the impossible. The F-22 pilots moving with uncanny precision, guiding her through the storm like shadows of her own instincts, guardians of her past, now intertwined with the present. The corridor of jagged peaks stretched before Flight 612 like the teeth of a steel predator. Lauren Donovan's hands were white-knuckled on the yoke, every muscle in her body screaming from hours of relentless microadjustments. The engines groaned, the left one sputtering unpredictably, alarms shrieking in a shrill symphony of chaos. The cabin behind her trembled, passengers bracing themselves, gripping their loved ones, eyes wide with terror. Every breath, every heartbeat depended on her. Hawk, final approach corridor ahead. Follow our guidance precisely, the calm, military voice instructed. Lauren nodded, swallowing hard, her jaw tight. Final approach. That phrase carried the weight of life and death. There was no room for error. The plane had survived storms, failing hydraulics, and near-catastrophic turbulence. But this, Threading through a narrow mountain pass with 185 lives on board, engines faltering, and the storm still howling was the ultimate test. The F-22s flanked the plane, moving with fluid precision, each tilt, shift, and bank perfectly synchronized with her own maneuvers. Lauren felt the invisible guidance as an extension of her instincts, micro-adjustments communicated without words, subtle shifts that stabilized the massive jet against violent gusts and erratic downdrafts. The air was turbulent, charged with electricity, each gust threatening to fling them into the jagged rock formations below. "Engage micro-throttle adjustments," Lauren commanded, her voice tight but steady. James mirrored her movements, hands flying over the backup controls. Sweat dripped down her temple as she fought to keep the plane level. Every second was a negotiation with physics, gravity, and failing machinery. She could feel the fuselage groaning under stress, wings flexing violently, engines straining to hold them aloft. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the jagged peaks, the plane's wings flexing, and the F-22s moving in perfect formation. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. Lauren exhaled slowly, focusing entirely on the instruments and her instincts. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Focus and control were the only tools that would save 185 lives. "Hawk, do not deviate. Corridor is tight. One miscalculation will be fatal," the voice warned. Lauren tightened her jaw, adjusting the yoke by mere millimeters. The plane shuddered violently, but she held steady. Every micro-adjustment counted, a tilt here, a throttle nudge there. The left engine flared again, sputtering. Alarms screamed. Cabin lights flickered, passengers screamed. Flight attendants braced themselves, shouting over the chaos, but Lauren's focus never wavered. Then a flash of lightning illuminated something impossible. The F-22 pilots were signaling her with subtle maneuvers, a code she instinctively recognized. These weren't just guides, they were her squad, remnants of her past missions. Faces she thought lost, partners she had trusted with her life, were now guiding her through the impossible. Her pulse surged. Recognition, relief, and fear collided in a chaotic storm of adrenaline. "They know me," Lauren muttered, almost to herself. "They're not just escorting the plane, they're here for me." James leaned closer, his voice awed. "Lauren, you trained with them, didn't you? That's why they're moving like this, they know your instincts." Lauren nodded, swallowing hard. Her past had collided with the present in a way she could never have anticipated. She was Hawk, the combat pilot, and now her skills were the only thing keeping Flight 612 alive. The passengers were unaware of the invisible lifeline flanking their plane, the ghosts of a past life silently ensuring their survival. "Engage final microcorrections," she commanded. "Follow the natural glide of the corridor. Don't fight the air. Let it carry us, just guide us." The plane responded, sluggish but obedient. Inch by inch, foot by foot, they advanced through the jagged peaks. Lauren felt every vibration, every gust, every microsecond of turbulence as if it were a living entity. She adjusted, compensated, held steady. The F-22s mirrored her maneuvers, moving in near-perfect synchronicity. It was almost supernatural, her past training amplified by elite pilots who knew her instincts better than anyone alive. The engines flared again, the left one sputtering ominously. Sweat dripped down Lauren's temple. Every passenger's life was literally in her hands. She inhaled, focusing on the yoke, throttles, and instruments. Micro-adjustments, instinct, precision, nothing else mattered. Then the voice came again, closer this time, urgent but calm. "Hawk, you've done this before. Trust yourself. Trust your training. We'll guide you through, but the next move is yours." Lauren exhaled slowly, centering herself. She remembered every split-second decision, every maneuver, every calculation from her years as a combat pilot. Fear existed only as fuel for focus. Panic could be deadly. Every breath, every heartbeat, every micro-movement mattered. The corridor narrowed further. Lightning illuminated the jagged rocks below, each peak a potential tomb. Lauren adjusted the yoke, nudging the plane slightly left, then right, compensating for downdrafts. The engines groaned, alarms shrieked. Behind her, the passengers screamed and prayed. She could feel their fear as if it were her own. And then came the impossible. One of the F-22s moved closer, signaling her to align with a narrow gap between two massive peaks. The precision required was unimaginable. A misalignment of even a few degrees could send Flight 612 crashing into the mountains. Lauren's pulse surged, hands trembling slightly, but she held firm. Micro-adjustments, calculated instincts, split-second judgment. Every ounce of skill she had ever learned, every instinct honed over years of combat came to bear in that moment. The gap loomed ahead, lightning flashing in jagged streaks, turbulence whipping the fuselage violently. Lauren exhaled, teeth clenched, eyes locked on the instruments and the path ahead. The F-22s flanking her signaled subtly, micro-cues she recognized instantly. She adjusted, nudged, and held steady. The left engine sputtered again, threatening to fail. Alarm screamed. Sweat poured down her face. Panic whispered in her mind, one misstep and it's over, but she ignored it. Focus, control, instinct, that was all that mattered. In a breathtaking, agonizing few seconds, she guided Flight 612 through the narrow gap. The plane shuddered violently as it cleared the last jagged peak, the engines groaning, hydraulics straining, but they were through. The storm still raged, but the immediate danger of the mountains had passed. Lauren exhaled, muscles trembling, sweat and adrenaline coursing through her body. James let out a shaky breath. "We did it, we're through." Lauren didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the path ahead, the F-22s flanking them, the storm still raging. This was far from over, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. They had survived the impossible thanks to skill, instinct, and the mysterious pilots who had recognized her call sign, who had come for Hawk. Lauren Donovan gritted her teeth, eyes scanning the cockpit instruments with a razor-sharp focus. The storm had not relented. Sheets of rain pounded the fuselage. Winds buffeted the wings, and the left engine coughed intermittently, threatening to fail entirely. Every muscle in her body screamed from hours of micro-adjustments, but there was no room for exhaustion. Behind her, 185 passengers clung to hope, terror, and prayer alike. Every life depended on her. Hawk final landing vector established. Follow precisely, the calm, military voice instructed. Lauren's chest tightened. The call sign, her old identity buried under years of civilian life, had returned. These F-22 pilots were not just guardians, they were sentient echoes of her past, allies she had trained with, or shadows of missions that had once defined her. And now their purpose was clear. They had come for Hawk. James adjusted the backup controls, voice tense. "Lauren, we can do this. We've got you." Lauren exhaled slowly, gripping the yoke tighter. The runway was visible, a narrow strip of safety carved out amid the storm, a target she had to hit with precision. The engines were strained to the limit, hydraulics unpredictable, yet the F-22s flanking them provided subtle, almost imperceptible guidance. Micro-adjustments, signals from a past life, a lifeline she never expected, and she trusted them instinctively, fully. The plane lurched violently as a gust of wind struck from the right. The left engine sputtered. Alarms shrieked. Flight attendants shouted above the chaos, bracing passengers, but Lauren remained calm, exhaling slowly, micro-adjusting the yoke. She remembered every split-second calculation from her combat days. Anticipate, respond, never hesitate. Hawk, maintain throttle, compensate for crosswind, align with glide path, the voice instructed. Lauren nodded subtly to James, her mind a machine of precise calculations and instinct. Micro-throttle adjustments, minute yoke corrections, subtle shifts in weight distribution. Every move could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. The F-22s mirrored her movements, maintaining formation, protecting her from the storm's full wrath, yet leaving her in control. Lightning flashed, illuminating the runway and the surrounding mountains. The storm was relentless, but Lauren's focus was absolute. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and Flight 612 would become another disaster statistic. But she was Hawk. She had survived impossible situations before, and she would survive this. The landing gear deployed, groaning as it extended. The left engine coughed again, refusing to deliver full thrust. Sweat streamed down Lauren's face, soaking her hair, but she didn't flinch. The runway was close, a narrow line in the chaos. Micro-adjustments, instinct, adrenaline, everything converged in a singular purpose. "Hawk, brace yourself. Final approach," the voice said. The plane descended, quivering under the force of the storm, wings flexing under stress. The passengers screamed, some praying, some gripping each other with white-knuckled desperation. Flight attendants yelled instructions, trying to maintain calm, trying to hold the line of order in chaos. Lauren felt it all, yet her focus never wavered. One microsecond of hesitation could be fatal. The F-22s adjusted positions, signaling subtly with movements she instinctively understood. They weren't just protecting the plane from the storm. They were coordinating with her, guiding her hands, anticipating every gust, every downdraft. Lauren exhaled, trusting her instincts, trusting her past, trusting these pilots she had once known in another life. The runway drew nearer. Visibility was low, rain pelting the windshield like shards of glass. Lightning illuminated the jagged mountains surrounding the airstrip. The plane groaned, engine straining, yet it remained airborne. Lauren made micro-adjustments, nudging the yoke, feathering the throttles, guiding the jet through turbulence with surgical precision. Then the left engine failed entirely. The alarm screamed. The plane pitched violently. Passengers screamed. Flight attendants braced. But Lauren didn't hesitate. Muscle memory, combat training, instinct, every fiber of her being was dedicated to one goal: keep the plane in the air long enough to reach the runway. "Hawk, glide path steady. You can do this," the voice encouraged. Lauren exhaled, making minute corrections, compensating for the failed engine with throttle adjustments and weight distribution. The plane responded just enough to hold a fragile equilibrium. The runway loomed ahead, a narrow line of salvation amid the storm and chaos. "Touchdown in 3-2, the voice counted, calm and precise. Lauren aligned the plane, wings level, throttle steady, yoke precise. The runway came closer. Inches, feet, seconds, every calculation mattered. Passengers screamed, gripping armrests, bracing for impact. Flight attendants held their ground, shouting over the roar of the engines and the storm. Lauren's heart pounded, muscles burning, sweat blinding her eyes, but her focus was absolute. The wheels kissed the tarmac. A shudder ran through the fuselage. Alarms screamed. The plane groaned, straining under the sudden friction, but it held. The F-22s mirrored her descent, providing protective coverage against gusts, guiding her through the final seconds. "Hawk, you did it," the voice said, calm, almost reverent. Lauren exhaled, allowing herself a fraction of relief. The plane slowed, tires screeching on wet asphalt before finally coming to a halt. Silence followed except for the pounding rain. 185 passengers stared wide-eyed, shock and awe etched across their faces. Some clutched loved ones, some sobbed, some stared in disbelief. They had survived. James turned to Lauren, voice trembling. "Lauren, you just saved 185 lives. Against everything, engines failing, storm, turbulence, how?" Lauren exhaled, chest heaving, sweat and adrenaline coursing through her. "We didn't do it alone," she said quietly, glancing outside at the F-22s, now hovering slightly above the runway, engines cutting through the storm with precision. Lightning illuminated the sleek fighter jets. Then, in a moment Lauren would never forget, one of the F-22s banked slightly, and over the radio came a voice she recognized immediately. "Hawk, welcome home." Her pulse surged. Recognition, relief, and awe collided. The F-22 pilots, the very pilots who had trained with her, survived missions with her and trusted her with life and death, had been the guardians she never knew would return. They weren't random strangers. They were her past, her comrades, her mentors, and now her silent saviors. Tears streamed down Lauren's face as she exhaled. The storm still raged, but Flight 612 was safe. 185 lives were preserved because of her skill, instinct, courage, and the guidance of those who had once called her Hawk. Passengers erupted in applause, some crying, some hugging each other, some kneeling in gratitude. Flight attendants wept quietly, still shaken but alive. James shook his head, all written across his face. "I've never seen anything like that. You're a legend, Lauren." Lauren didn't respond immediately. Her gaze lingered outside, on the F-22s, on the pilots who had saved them all, on the storm that had tested every ounce of her training and instinct. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. She had been called back to her past, thrust into chaos, and emerged victorious, not just as a pilot but as Hawk. The storm began to subside. The F-22s banked, engines roaring before streaking into the clouds, vanishing as silently as they had arrived. Lauren watched them go, a mix of relief and curiosity washing over her. Their purpose was fulfilled, their message clear. Trust, skill, and courage had carried the day. And for 185 passengers, she was nothing less than a guardian angel in the storm. A reminder that courage, focus, and instinct could triumph against impossible odds.